It's good to see you and to be with you sort of in this weird way that we're doing church and camp and all of this stuff now. If you don't know me or don't remember me, my name is Sara Nave Fisher and I'm the senior minister at Rolling Oaks Christian Church in San Antonio. I was with you at Spring Rally and, well, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But first, I want to introduce you to my husband, Jonathan. Can I say something about yourself?
Yes. My name is Jonathan Fisher. I am active duty U.S. Army chaplain in the Army. So I currently serve at Brooke Army Medical Center, although we've lived all over and I've been doing it for 16 years now that we've been on this Army road.
So one of the things that I have been thinking a lot about as I have been preparing for this and this camp week that we have is that, I don't know if you remember this or if it's crossed your mind at all, but the last weekend that we were together when we were there for CYF Spring Rally, that was the last weekend before kind of everything changed, right? When we were there that weekend, there was kind of this in the background, this, hey guys, coronavirus is this thing, so we had extra hand sanitizer and we talked about not hugging and washing hands, but that was kind of all it was at that point. And we were together for the whole weekend, in close proximity and doing a whole bunch of things that now we look back and we wouldn't do right now because it was quite a way to share germs. So I think that is significant. I know that it is significant for me. I am really glad that the last time I was with a body of believers, it was with you. And I hope that for you, if you were there that weekend, that you spend some time and kind of think about that, the significance of the church and of your camp church and the way that camp fills some of those roles. In the last few months, everything has changed. That following week, right after CYF Spring Rally, that's when the NBA, I think that's when it got real, right? When the NBA closed down and then schools closed down from there and everything else. So as we talk about who the church is and what the church is and who we are as the church, 4 months ago, I had no idea that by July, I would have such different answers to those questions. So that is what we're going to talk a little bit about today.
It was just, yesterday? Or
Yesterday.
Day before yesterday, when we realized we have been locked down in our little space for 4 months. At this point, I'm not sure I really remember what life was like before the big change. And, you were talking about seeing people and hugging them. And is that a thing people do, like in the real world?
Not anymore. Hopefully. You shouldn't be. So as we begin together, I'd like to read our text for today. It comes from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 through 10. And this is the same text that we talked about back in March at CYF Spring Rally as we talked about who are we as the church. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of God who called you out of darkness and into God's marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
So before we start talking about who we are as the church, I'm just wondering, and I'm going to totally put you on the spot because we didn't really talk about this, what crossed your mind as you heard that text or as you read that text? Did anything stick out at you?
Whenever I think about that text, what I often think about is the idea of chosen. Set apart, chosen, and yet in our theology as disciples, we choose to be a part of it. So there is this kind of space where we are both chosen and we choose. And we choose to enter into this space together with God and with other people. And I experience that idea of choosing as God has chosen us, but we get a choice in joining. So when we write a story with God, when we, to use the phrase, co-create with God, that is an act of our choosing and an act of God's choosing. And together we write something new that wouldn't exist without those who choose to be a part and who choose to play along in the grand thing we're calling life.
And I think what's really cool about that is that it is a choice that I make to co-create with God, and a choice that you make. But when we both choose that together, we open up even more possibilities that wouldn't have existed if it was just me or just you. And so everybody watching this has that opportunity, that same invitation to choose to partner with God as we kind of move forward in bringing the realm of God to earth and to humanity. And as we all make those choices together, we open up new possibilities.
Right, because we're a people. Right.
People.
We are a chosen and we are a people. So in that context, I mean, what makes a person a person? And one of the things I guess existentially that I see that this is what makes people people is the ability to choose both for themselves and even against their own best interests. You know, that's the power of choice that makes us authentically human. I think it's Viktor Frankl who talked about what makes a human human is being able to choose what happens and how they react and how they even interpret the situation that they find themselves. So we are a chosen and we are a people. And you're a people and I'm a people.
And we're a people together.
And we're a people together, right? You are the church, I am the church, we are the church. But in that context, we all have personality. And we all have our own values and we have our own core themes, you know, and central ideas through which we act on the decisions that we have. So this idea,
because I'm going to act in a different way than you're going to act, which is in a different way that you're going to act. And and I think that's the idea of the body of Christ, right? And everybody has different gifts, and it takes all of us using our different gifts together, because, you know, as Scripture says, you wouldn't want a whole body full of hands, right? And you wouldn't want a whole body full of teachers without people to encourage, and without people to preach, and without people to do other things, other acts of service.
It's even happening in the here and now.
Yeah.
Like we're choosing our words in this space and creating something that wasn't really planned.
No, we did not. We didn't plan out really what we were going to say.
You know, I bring all of me and all of my past and all of my experiences and all of my ideas about life, and you bring the same, and then in this space we create something, and you are experiencing this experience. You're experiencing that through all of your experiences and all of your baggage and all, you know, for better or for worse, you know, you're experiencing that and making meaning from it. And we are both a chosen and we are a people.
And then we are all going to be different because of today. None of us will be the same tomorrow that we are today, because we all are sharing this same experience. So, beloved of God, wherever you sit today, you are in the process of changing, and you're in the process of hearing from God even as you experience this conversation and having new choices and new opportunities before you today. So one of the things that we talked about in the spring is who we are, both as we kind of talked about 3 different levels of church, right? We use this word church to mean a lot of different things. So sometimes it can be helpful to define the different ways that we talk about the word church. And one of the ways we talk about the church is the local church. For the church that I am at, it is Rolling Oaks Christian Church. And then we talk about church as in our denomination, our shared denomination of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. And then church also means the church universal, all of the people who follow God throughout all of history, time, and space throughout the entire world. So my question for you is, as you think about how church, maybe each one of those things, or if you wanted to focus on one of them, has changed and shifted, has grown and responded in the last 4 months, what are some of the things that you have observed, and what are some of the things that bring you hope?
So one of the ways that I have noticed our church kind of shifting and changing is there's a revaluation about what is important and what is not important. What do we miss about being together, and what is so important that it carries over as it can into an online worship space, virtual worship space, and how that's been shifted. I think one of the things that gives me a lot of hope, you asked about hope, is how flexible the church is proving to be. Not just the local church, but the church of on the meta level, kind of around the world, as the church is adjusting and adapting and changing. And there's a point at which every church really adapts to that. And the disciples are interesting because historically even, they have been adaptable and changing. So when the established church from Europe that came to the shores of what would become America, it brought with it all of its European baggage. And in that milieu, Stone and Campbell decided to start something new that more met the needs of the frontier. So an empowered laity, when there couldn't be a pastor getting to every body of believers, an empowered laity could offer the communion of the saints and the Lord's table. And that was really important. It was really radical. Like, people were out there doing the work of the church who never had any training with the church, who weren't ordained by bishops from Europe. They were just on the edge of, at that point, the edge of Western civilization. Not the edge of civilization, but the edge of Western civilization. Doing church, and they were adaptable and flexible, and that keeps happening in our church.
That the church is always changing and always shifting.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is really interesting is that in churches in the United States, when we think about church, if you stop and close your eyes for just a moment, when you think about church, what is it that you think about? I'll give you a second. My hunch is that you might think about a building that's probably fairly rectangular and the meeting house style, as what a lot of our churches are. You might think about Sunday school classes. You might think about youth group or Bible study. And in the way that the church has continued to adapt, Sunday school started as a way to teach kids how to read by reading the Bible in like the 19th century. And youth groups, did you know, I actually did a project on youth groups when I was in seminary, a big project about it. Study the history of youth groups. And youth group, as an idea, as a function, didn't really begin until the 70s and 80s, the 1970s and 80s. So as the church is seeing needs of the world around it, the church is constantly adapting, and that is that co-creation. Mm-hmm. That is how we partner with God to imagine and enact something new.
I'm even thinking about how the church has shifted in the way that the church recognizes people. Just a couple of seconds ago, I mentioned it was the end of Western civilization. But really what we're talking about is Western European civilization, because they were ancient civilizations here in the Americas long before Europeans ever showed up. And as the church as our church, talk about the disciples, as we have, grown and matured in the way we understand people, through the war between the states, the Civil War in America, through the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s, and even into now, Black Lives Matter. In it, we are living in a time of space, really, where we're embracing what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to be human in a world where we all swim in the same kind of cultural milieu. We bring ourselves into this space. So we as a church have had to do some real reckoning about who are the people. When we talk about the people, who are they? They're all of us in this space, and we are bringing all of who we are, all of our cultural baggage, all of our cultural gifts and limitations into this space together. And as the church recognizes that, we grow stronger together.
Well, one of the things that I think that made me think of is that in the last 4 months, every person in the United States and really many countries throughout the world have had this shared experience. And with that shared experience, it's helped us gain clarity around some things. So there's a couple of things that I do want to specifically mention and point to when we think about how the church has shifted and responded in the last few months. one very specific thing is the Poor People's Campaign, which of course did not begin in the last 4 months. It began a couple of years ago as a response to work that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did during the Civil Rights era. And this is a campaign begun by a Disciples of Christ pastor, Reverend Dr. William Barber, who is working to bring together all sorts of people that society is kind of pushing to the edge in a lot of different ways. And that it is church and it is apart from church, but I think the line between what is church and what is not church is a little bit blurry sometimes, especially when we talk about the way that God calls us to act and to live and to love. And so that is one example of something that has happened in the last 4 months. Disciples churches are participating in that movement. We are doing things on Zoom. We are doing camp on Zoom, right? We're doing church on Zoom. We're doing fellowship and Bible study and youth group and Sunday school and all of these things. We're doing the same thing and in a new way.
And sometimes when you think, when I think about things, I think in things of terms of gifts and limitations. So whatever gift comes along with it carries with it inherently a limitation because it's a limited thing. It's a limited object, right? So to use the Poor People's Campaign as an example, this was intended to be a moment that would take place in Washington, D.C. And what happened was it was a moment that took place around the world because there was involvement. I know that we, from our living room, participated actively in both conversation and it impacted us. Our kids are sitting between us and we spent all Saturday morning being a part of the Poor People's Campaign.
But we wouldn't have been able to go to Washington, D.C.
We could not have been gone to Washington, D.C. So that there's a way in which it seems sometimes limiting. And I would say historically, what comes up seems, anything that demands a change seems inherently limiting. Like, oh, now you're going to recognize all these people as people. I can't do that. That's scary. That's change. That's different. And yet, as we open and expand, our world gets bigger and wider and, dare I say, better, really.
And we get to know God in new ways, and we get to know each other in new ways. So that is one of the things that I want to leave with you today, is that there is hope, that the church is changing. I've heard that the church historically reforms, and if you think about what the word reform or reformation means, it is literally to take something that has been formed and to imagine maybe a lump of clay or of Play-Doh, and you might start out with a Play-Doh dog and then you kind of smush it down and it's that same exact Play-Doh, but then you reform it into something new. Maybe you reform it into a table and chairs. And so as the church is continuing to reform, it was about 500 years ago that Martin Luther, when Martin Luther, nailed, he was angry at the church and he wrote it all out and he nailed it on the church door, and that led to a series of events that completely changed the church, and we are here today because of that. And those are the things that give me hope. And if you're watching this and you're a young person, I have a lot of hope because I know that what you are bringing to the church is something that I can't imagine. The ways that you are going to partner with God you have imagination and vision and insight and experiences with God that I don't have because of who you are and the places that you are. And I'm really excited to partner with you as we all partner with God and see what happens next.
Yeah. You mentioned Martin Luther, and Martin Luther is a complicated person with a lot of gifts and limitations that go along with even that story of the Reformation. But to completely oversimplify it, right?
Sure.
You had an individual who had some needs, and the church wasn't meeting his needs. And so he demands the church in a radical way. I am certain that many of Martin Luther's confessors and his clerical peers were all like, hey, Martin, you just need to, just chill, man. It's a process. We're going to do this in a process. And he said, I want to do it in a process. And he nails the 95 Theses door, invites the church to a debate, and then, political forces change and it just goes tumbling and, the Reformation happens. And I think the message I take from that is that we are a chosen and we are a people. And as a people, we can demand change. And we can demand that our leaders shift and provide for our needs. Because that's what the church is supposed to do. The church doesn't exist, in my view, the church doesn't exist to meet the needs of people who are dead and passed away, for church buildings that existed in some other age. The church exists in the here and now, today. And either the church is meeting our needs, or the church is meeting somebody else's needs and we're paying for it. I mean, it's, whose needs are we meeting right now? What are your needs? What do you need from the church in the meta and the church in the micro? What do you need from that? And are you willing to stand up and say, hey, I have some needs here and this isn't getting it. Could you meet my need?
And also, I think the also true with that is that the church doesn't exist only to meet our needs, and that we're also invited to share our gifts with the church and with other people, because as we all meet each other's needs together, as we carry each other's burdens, as we share in joys and concerns, as we share in all of the struggles that we have, that is what the church is, and that is who we are called to be.
That's the both and.
That's the both and.
That's the co-creating.
That's the co-creating. Church, I'm excited to see how you co-create with God in this coming week and coming season, this coming year that we have no idea what this is going to look like. We know that it's going to look different, and we know that God is going to be a part of it every step